working on this a little bit earlier this week. Fred, of course, you're welcome too. I know you've been interested in this stuff for a long time, and it could likely inform our, what we're doing um, with the advocates as well, right? In terms of particularly the interactions with the men and the women, right? Um, and women's clans, I should say. And so it's uh, it's this thought that I wanted to bring to the table. Figure out how do we, uh, you know, kind of, maybe we make it an issue itself, right? A proposal that includes our um, uh, uh, declaration as men, right? Our pledge from the um, men's clans, right? Um, and so, there could be a pledge from the women's clans as well that make up their code of conduct, right? That includes all of this living constitution stuff that we mentioned, right? Um, and includes the recital stuff that we mentioned, right? And so, kind of all this kind of nicely blends together, and maybe is coming together in a timely way. But I understand that it kind of also could get confusing because we've already put out this particular flow that includes the women and the men coming together, and we can still use that same flow, except you know uh, before we have the women and men come together, we should um, uh, have completely autonomous processes decide whether or not the women want us or not. Um, and I know we don't have too many women involved, but maybe the tooling helps helps the women's clans bring other women into the conversation. They can consider uh, some of the ways that we're uh, uh, proving our temperament, proving how careful we are. A lot of this, a lot of the system design that is here, the tooling, and all of this careful, seriousness when thinking of structures that are there for women in decision making processes. It's come from inside, right? And that can be part and parcel to how we are showing and proving ourselves as temperament wise and whatnot. But my biggest fear about all of this is that it can confuse folks. So maybe using the tooling is the best option just for clarity that can happen in real time discussions or asynchronously. But that's another thing that we should include in setting a precedent for the testing this tooling is uh, uh, the priority for real time calls, right? The the first, it should be last resort, the asynchronous. If it's not suitable for time zones, and first resort is using your voice in real time. But yeah, I just want to put all that on the table before I forget it. And hopefully you can talk now, or your computer's working, Hero. But I hope all that made sense to you guys, and I'm glad I didn't forget.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So basically, that consensus, the consensus flow, the tooling, um, you wanna um, investigate one of the areas, which is when men and women come together, and if that should, how that process should go, and we should involve the woman into letting them voice how they feel about those coming together, right? And we are giving them, we have this, so basically the men, so if I just put it into the flow, it would be like the turtle clan, one of the men, Harold, had a thought about how we could adjust or improve the current flow. And then Harold went talked to the wolves, And the wolves and Harold, the turtle and the wolf, got together, thought about it, and thought, okay, maybe it's an opportunity to to to, to use the tooling as a supporting dialogue thing to get this conversation going with the woman to see how they feel about this specific topic, right? So it went from the turtle, you, to the wolves, us, Merrick and Fred, and we had a discussion, and Fred and Merrick and whoever thought about it. So, oh yeah, it's actually worth raising it with the woman, and raising worth broadcast that, bringing that topic to the table, and therefore we started a thread, an issue, having thought about this is actually a very useful topic to discuss.
Yeah, yeah, it's too because if that autonomous processes because we want to like do our due diligence before just having counsel with them without really asking if they wanted us.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting because it can also uh, um, create a thing where there's a men's declaration, there's a women's declaration, and then there's obviously them coming together at a certain point, right? But it'll be interesting because it'll like we can have some of the first testing of the tooling be this particular discussion point, and if in their autonomous processes they say, yeah, we're ready to work with you guys. By the next testing iteration, we can test the flow in its completeness where the men and the women come together, right? And so we can see that change happen, with the tooling, right? And use the tooling to just ensure that carefulness before just doing it. And so hopefully that alleviates some of the confusion by making it explicit in as an issue and proposal, like you're saying, that comes from me, but is lodged by the wolves right now, which would be one representative, but for now it's dispersed amongst you guys, and it would be on you guys to help me reform, reshape, how that is. How that's laid out in a proposal. But I guess it would sound a lot like what we just described, right? Where we use our declarations, our pledges, um, our code of conducts, right, as uh, a means of uh, proving uh, some of our effort. This is some of the approach that we decided on for the Life Protectors efforts uh, declaration with myself, Merrick, and Mark, where it's you know through our declaration, it's also a means of showing we understand the proper interaction, we understand the proper temperament, we understand these particular points of protocol, um, and we want to make it evident to you guys, along with um, being proactive in uh, you know building out this tooling and whatnot, right? And so. Um, if the women deem our declaration sufficient beside theirs, right? Because they should also make one. Um, uh, then that's how we come together, and that's their measuring. That could be one of their measuring sticks amongst their own that they deem. But to shape it into a proposal of some kind can start like that. So we're not just putting it out there all open ended, right? And potentially they can hand us back our declaration and say add this or this didn't match with what we with our declaration, or we feel like there's a point of conflict. right? And so maybe this is a powerful thing to sit on before we go directly into uh, sitting together, sort of, in decision making. Because I can see that type of process bringing us genuinely closer together, getting us to know each other a little bit more, just by what we're putting in our respective declarations or pledges. Um, and those pledges can be really powerful too, because they're ultimately tying Web3 commitments to a wampum dialogue, right? And learning it, right? Being authentic in that way. So I don't, hopefully all that made sense again. Um, but yeah, I think you're right, Hero, in terms of how this can get kickstarted. Like this is one of those times where a bear, right, is going directly to a wolf and saying, "Can you please lodge this? I think this is suitable for public broadcasting." And so you guys have to make a decision.
Yeah, definitely agree. So I just going back to the earlier topic, um, about one of the things that you said, and I put the document in the chat. So if one of you could help um, open it and maybe screen share, I'll talk you through how that relates to one of the points you raised earlier. Huh, it's not that one, sorry. Oh, let me. Oh, it is. It's in the meeting chat now. Let me check. Yeah, that one.
Is it the right one?
Yeah, this one in the chat. Conflict resolution.
Okay. Okay. Get back to share my screen.
I'm just trying to demonstrate the point you made earlier using an example.
I'm trying to get back to it now. Let me see. Okay, this is it, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I think that is.
before you mentioned about how Frigger sort of push you to um, do more things and you know go full on this kind of stuff, and you said like how like almost like showing people how could that uh, relate or create stuff, document or relate to stacks. So I guess like this could be an example of how I attempted to relate it and make it so that it's using the indigenous system but in stacks, but better than just the normal way. So this is obviously the end sort of process, roughly, where we would like people to chime in and stuff like that, right? But if you go to the next slide, so there's a citation where I basically just went to Google and Google a little bit indigenous stuff, conflict resolution. But I basically read the paper about that thing, and some of the things that I got out of it was, much more than just um, solving two people's personal issues. So the indigenous people, they refer to these kind of harmony and healing and peacemaking, these sort of ethos, or I don't know. Um, so some of the points from the paper, which you can also check out yourself, is very long, but I pull out some of the important stuff or some of the things that sort of jumped out to me at the time when I read it. Um, so those bullet points, and if you go to the next slides, also some more like bullet point. So for me, like what I thought was like indigenous stuff is much more about like it's not just like solving, because in the typical system you're saying about how is this innovative, right? And how is this long term sustainable? If we didn't incorporate indigenous stuff, we could end up just okay. So two people have problem, and then we find somebody, and then talk to them, and then okay, so they are both they met their compromise, and they're okay, and that's it, finish, happy. But how we could home that in more using indigenous system was, I thought, this harmony bit where in phase three you try to really like make people um, you really try to bring the harmony in. So you have the mediation, but you have the healing part. It's almost like the peacemaking part, like put down properly, and you bring the harmony and healing, and therefore it helps to create the long-term sustainability side rather than just using an average system that does not care enough to really go deeper and help the parties heal. Um, and the reason why I brought this up is because earlier you mentioned about the indigenous design, how about the living constitution, how you could make that a document, um, but also using that, taking that document, actually use it, turn it into something that's usable. Maybe like this could be one of the example how we could have turned a living constitution code of conduct, picked out one of the area that's in the code of conduct, and now turn it into actual something actionable.
Yeah, I mean, also too, right? Like, if the living code of conduct actually includes that recital bit, and it starts with the recital bit, right? Maybe the first time we ever, um, uh, you know, come to position on uh, uh, the written versions of before we can write anything down about it. Uh, we have to have a recital, right? We have to have a the first iteration of the oral part, right? Which can add to the anything that's written about it, but it's also included that the real thing is the oral thing, and like the type of relationships that get built in that time, right? Maybe that kicks over the course of weeks, right? Asynchronously, or folks coming together as they can, real time throughout a certain time period, just like what the tooling provides for, right? Um, that can really maybe even be preventative to conflict that wouldn't even arise because of the some of the relationships developed in that reciting of the oral constitution and that back and forth, right? But to your point again, after the fact, right? Not only will people be able to point to written stuff, maybe it's useful for the function of conflict resolution stuff, or for the function of representatives deciding whether or not an issue gets lodged or not. But uh, it's really interesting to think about the oral, people being able to go back in their memories and apply law, right? Not apply an opinion, but apply law that everybody agreed to, right? Not just in our own recitations, but in recitations that folks come to from the Longhouse, right? There's a big law recital coming up actually in the ninth moon in September. Uh, uh, or maybe August, if I'm not mistaken. Um, um, a 25,000 year cycle, right? And the final law recital, final in terms of final in a great cycle, um, and people being able to go back in their memories and apply learnings from that experience, right? Even if it's remote, right? Folks are just tuning in digitally, or especially folks that can get there physically, right? That has an impact on your memory in a very particular kind of way. And memory of oral recitations, just when you were speaking and thinking about it now, memory of oral recitations has a deeper resonance for whatever reason than just referring to uh, a list of bylaws, right? For example, right? And so, um, particularly because um, it allows you to be even more objective to the vibes that that person gave off, objective to in the objective and neutral, right? In the sense of applying law as opposed to opinion, right? Because um, you can go back in your memory and remember that person nodding their head along with everybody else in the recital, right? And so, a turtle that gets evoked in this um, conflict resolution flow is not just being objective by the standard of opinion; they're being objective by standard of the last law recital, right? Of the last uh, uh, code of conduct recital, right? In this sense, right? But also in the longhouse sense too. To be able to refer to both in your memory is different than being able to just check a list of code of conduct, and that's a big part of what I was getting at in terms of what that opens up for our own structures when we're no longer limited by black and white paperwork, but we're opened up to um, you know applying law from our memory, right? Um, and so yeah, this is interesting to think about, and hopefully the the function of code of conduct, particularly when once we include Tua Wampum in that functional way, right? Um, uh, saying that this is also a part of the code of conduct. This is not just what inspires a research. This is a part of the code of conduct. That means that representatives have to, be objective, right? Or the turtle that is taken up the responsibility to help with conflict resolution, they have a means of being objective, right? We have actually have access to these protocols. Otherwise, it could be, you know, I'm objective because Oprah told me that this is how this is how I should approach conflict resolution. This is, I learned this from a daytime television show somewhere, right? Or a self help book from anywhere, right? And a lot of these things, even when they seem different, right? Even it could be Taoism, it can be Confucianism, it can be Buddhism, right? It can be other Abrahamic religions that folks are using for objectivity, right? But this is not so much the same thing, right, as what this particular longhouse offers us in terms of objectivity. They offer us something really, really special when it comes to matrilineal protocols that other band councils or tribal councils they would just say it's objective because majority vote said it was objective, right? And so this is, I think, a big learning from Sunday from the Longhouse too. Like, and we've heard it said before, but to think of consensus, right? Not as everybody agreeing, but everybody agreeing to uphold law, right? So like you can like leave your opinions at the door in that sense. It's not like they go away or magically disappear, but it's a means for us to all be neutral and objective together, right? And agree to uphold law, agree to uphold the good mind, right? And that's essentially what's being agreed to in those law recitals, right? What is and isn't the good mind, and then it makes decision making and conflict resolution really simple because then it's just that's the only two options on the table for every position. Is it of the good mind or is it not? And so this is where we find our objectivity and our neutrality, rather than just hoping that the representative has it right. It points to that function of the living constitution that you referred to, Hero. So thank you kindly for sharing this and allowing us to
That's
point some
really
of this.
interesting because I didn't know that. So it sounds like quite a critical part, to be honest. Like that person, we're relying that turtle really understand the Constitution really well and actually practice it. Um,
Mhm. On different levels too, right? The stacks level and the indigenous modes level,
goes.
right? Yeah. So the stacks code of conduct, the stacks constitution as it relates to us and our specific context, but also that broader to a wampum dialogue context. But it's powerful stuff, right? Especially in the context of all of this that you guys put together.
Yeah, yeah, because then it's not. Yeah, it's go one level deeper. So let's say, like this is the paper level process, which includes the clan. But actually, what you're saying is um, the real like to really do it like to a high quality. Really, you need to really understand the constitution and be yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I get what you mean. But yeah, it's cool. Thanks for sharing that stuff on Sunday or whatever day. Yeah, I had enough talking. I don't want to hear my voice anymore. Please, someone else talk.
Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah, I'm about tired of my voice too.
Well, I can talk a little bit before then. uh, if y'all aren't too tired of my voice, but yeah, yeah, I think there's something to that. I'm just thinking about how sitting in the live Zoom, especially with my face on the camera, and whether I'm doing that head nodding and if I'm looking at the camera and like paying attention. Um, but even just being present in a live room, and when you're talking about that, kind of makes you an author, right?
Hmm.
Of what is being said in the room. And I'm just thinking about how different it feels being a part of the real time dialogue versus watching one of those videos, like watching a video of that same dialogue like the next day, right? I'm not as, alive. I'm not as like very much like, like it's a feeling thing. It's like it's how much how much I'm focusing on it and how much I'm feeling like I need to be ready in case I need to, respond direct to what's being said. And then also, yeah, thinking about like body movements if you're being seen, right, on camera. And of course, so much more so in real life. Real life feels very different. But yeah, so just about that real time. Yeah, so just noticing that feeling was the one thing I wanted to say. And then as it pertains to, doing like a real time oral, constitution for us in the stacks context, that's I think we need to get that translation going too, that live translation going to every language, right? Because when we're talking about that constitution, what's something that we can agree on all around the world, right? Because the internet's everywhere, the internet's everybody, and we want to provide that balance between the languages as well. And it seems not too far away. I feel like I just need to like rent the server space, just like run a couple jitsies and like have a few different rooms, and we could get that live translation going. Just something about having that worldwide, come togetherness as we iterate on what our stacks, constitution, which is a reflection and an ode to, but not just an ode to, but a direct tie into that Tira Wampum, that great law piece. Yeah, I just think there's a lot to that real time, and that's a good idea. And then also maybe, like you're saying, like tie it up or initiate, somehow tie it in with this great law of peace, the last of this cycle of constitution, or a recitation going down the summer. Maybe there's a tie in there with the stacks. Advocates code of conduct or constitution oral recitation, because that makes a lot of sense to do that, and I think to do it too at, like you say, like a faster cadence, as we are early on in it, and being in this pretty quick international space, right, where there's a lot going on in the stacks world. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's me. Check.
Yeah, no, thank you kindly, Merrick. Yeah, even you're talking about being physically there in the space and nodding along. Like when you're there, just one day removed, you know, the other people there can't say that you're not an author in the exact same way of that oral constitution or living constitution, because you can't be said per se that remember when we all agreed to that. Remember when we all agreed to this new evolution understanding of these protocols, of this code of conduct, of this constitution, right? If you're there, if you're just watching the day after, right? Like there's no head nod to see, or there's no confirmation, there's no your contribution in not speaking can't be accounted for, because even if you don't speak and you're just there, um, you're not speaking lends itself to the fact that you didn't disagree enough, right? Or you saw that in law, even if you disagreed opinion wise, you saw in law that there was nothing to disagree to, right? There's nothing in law that said this may be of the bad mind, right? And so, in that way, your participation, your engagement, which is one of the hardest things for anybody's decision-making systems or models, right, is engagement, right? It's 1%. It caps out. Whether you're talking about, governments, corporations, Web3, right, Ethereum network stuff. Participation is not a thing. Engagement is not really a thing when it comes to decision making. But when you consider this particular context, you see the responsibility of engagement. You see the power in engagement. I think the reason why you don't see engagement in these other systems is as cliche as it may sound and as surface level as it may sound, it's largely because we know we're not empowered in those structures. So there's no real incentive or no real mechanism for our engagement or our participation. But in this particular system design, engagement and the use of your power, use of your voice is tangibly felt, right? And then it makes sense that engagement should be higher, that it should engender more engagement. Even the responsibilities of the wolf clan show you um, how it speaks to engendering participation and engagement a little bit more so than our conventional structures um, that don't have the same constitution guiding that wolf, saying, making them alert to what they need to be alert to, right? Is why our systems don't function pretty much, right? But that those more subtle forms of participation, I think, are huge to understanding the intricacies of engagement, right? Me just being there and you know could go a long way, right? Especially in a physical room where somebody's presence, even physical presence, is a lot more memorable than these faces on the screen where I have no idea of your body mass. I have no idea of your general vibe or your how much you're fidgeting or how much like there's just a lot more memorable things in physical presence of somebody that uh, I think goes a long way to um, make up participation and in all of these things. But I think that uh, some of these subtleties are going to be interesting coming up. Um, I mean, if we can see any distinctions in our engagement in other systems, because if there are distinctions in our engagement in other systems, maybe we can point to this. Um, we can point to this authentic empowerment, right, of voice. Um, so, uh, yeah, you made me think of some of that, Eric, when speaking of the physical space stuff and even the things that are missed, if you're just watching a recording of something. Um, because, yeah, I think that, especially whether you're thinking about conflict resolution or you're just thinking about neutrality, uh, that becomes important. Um, but then you see how important the Constitution and the oral recitation of it, how important that becomes, all of our individual understandings of it. Um, and yeah, I think that's all part and parcel to engendering that horizontality in a given community. There's no easy way, to do it. We did some of our inventory taking and things like this, but uh, I think that that's where a whole lot of more inventory taking will happen is when there's that back and forth in some type of recital like atmosphere, um, uh, where you can feel your contribution to the evolution of the collective understanding. It's a big reason why, right, up until recent weeks and for all of these years, we tend not to miss any sessions at all. Even if we're not there present in the Zoom, we'll be watching alongside on Facebook somehow, because if there is a um, a moment where we want to use our voice or we want to, right, we feel like something is being, right, like we understand how important that is to the processes, how that's guided councils before, which then held momentum into other councils, right. And it's one of the first things that we recognize as a deep part of the council process. The Longhouse says, each clan throwing their contribution into the center. You really get this emergent improv-like creativity that is not accessible without the collective. And so, yeah. But I'll shut up. Maybe that's a good place to start to close. Um, Unless there's anything else on you guys' minds. Of course, I spoke to a couple times getting started back in the clan design stuff, and tooling, and mentioned ways that we can get started on that. We have a couple issues on mine. Of course, we should reignite the conflict resolution stuff from yourself and Juliet Hero. We have some more things. More temperament specific maybe for ourselves to formulate and get into a nice proposal, right, Merrick? And maybe it goes right alongside some of our other work with Life Protected Declaration. But yeah, this was a productive session. I think getting into more of the nuances of the well, so that we can set a good precedence with some of our first testing. And we got yeah, we got some things that were lingering on our minds out. At least I did, and I know you guys did too. So thank you kindly, guys, for the time today. As always, this is beautiful. As always.
That's Merrick. Earlier, you were saying you were a little bit hesitant in, you were thinking a lot about the stuff, but you were not quite sure, like how to put it down or something. Could you elaborate? Because I think you got cut off a little bit there. So yeah, I just want to hear your thought process earlier on. What what thoughts you had? Yeah.
I might not. I might be running out of gas. I might not remember what you're referring to. I remember earlier at the beginning
Oh,
we
Merrick,
wanted.
Merrick.
Yeah,
I
I
was
think.
thinking
Go ahead.
Merrick.
Oh, Merrick's talking.
I was asking Merrick. Sorry.
Yeah, I think your microphone got really quiet at the beginning of when you said Merrick, and then you asked your question, so we only heard the question part. So that's what happened.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, all good, all good. Yeah, no, I can answer. Uh, for me, I think like there was a few like layers to it. Like I read first when was it Ryder that, or yeah, it was Ryder who posted that initial kind of ask in the um in the Woman's Wolf clan, um in that active issues, um and yeah, I read it, and I like there was like a lot in it, and I like started like when I need to write answers on things, sometimes I like need a notepad, and I spread out, and I like um have to answer different parts of it if I want to sound coherent. Basically, for me to like make a response in writing, especially when it's something big that touches a lot of stuff, I take a long time to think on it and to word it. And so I like kind of started doing that, and then I had other stuff that's like part of my like I just had like I didn't finish, and then I had other stuff, and then like it was like the next day because I didn't have time to finish it that day, and then I came back to it and I had different thoughts on it. And so I don't know. I honestly, it's been a few days now. I would have to look at it again to have new thoughts on it. And maybe hopefully get to a point where I write something down. Basically, I think on things a lot. I think on things a lot, especially if I'm gonna write something down. Writing down to me just feels uh, heavy sometimes, which is something I work on. But like, I find it easier to answer things in like dialogue than I do to write things down because it takes me
Yeah.
a long time to write, so my
I,
brain goes fast
I
and then
think you
I
mentioned
can't.
like you prefer like speaking uh, real-time dialogue, right?
Definitely, and I need to put in probably just more effort to get into the writing too. It's just like I have to like really kind of force myself a little bit, um, which I'm not super good at doing. But to like stay focused on writing sometimes, I don't know what it is, man. I feel like I'm going a bit into my neurology without having solid like vocab for it. But like, yeah, um, um, yeah. I would need to like sit back and look at it and write it again. For me, especially what I find helps with writing is like doing like kind of what we've done with these working groups, particularly a lot of time with like Haas and Harold. I know writing out that consensus spec of just like going through again and again and iterating on it and kind of talking through it and having that writing in front of you. I'm kind of doing that with some of the other projects that I'm like kind of connected to, and I think that's like a tool for myself that I'm gonna implement more of. I don't know, maybe I could tie in somehow something like that with almost like that's kind of what feels a little bit like what happens with the how the Wolf Clan will, or the Wolf Rep will post the first bit of text and then edit it right as the dialogue goes, right, um to keep iterating on it and editing that initial proposal as more dialogue comes up. So um yeah, maybe I just got to do more of that and just get my head in that space of the active issues for myself personally. Maybe, but also, yeah, there's some of that edit and iterate. Some, I don't know. Maybe there's a way to somehow make that easier with some of the technology and the tooling or the flow, or maybe even just the way that we word it. The iteration.
Maybe it's like being more precise, like the wolf being more precise what the proposal is asking of. I don't know whether that would help.
Yeah, I think that's something too. Is like particularly for the proposals, we want to like narrow in on like, I think more like not atomic, but like more like, yeah, structured and like
Yeah.
narrow maybe points, maybe broad too. I don't know, but if it's gonna be broad, it's got to be like maybe like speaking of what is the like. I've heard this language domain of authority, like what uh, uh being specific about the scope of what the Stacks Advox collective is going to, you know, um, act as. Like, what is the position of the Stacks Advox collective on this like broader issue? Maybe but that's more like then you're still coming to that specific position, and then specifically to something compared against the Constitution, right, or the code of conduct. And that's maybe a tool that we can use to help get more specific and a little bit more narrow and yeah, with what we come with the actual proposal text itself.
Yeah, that's a
But
really interesting point, I think. Because,
I
for
think
example, the previous proposal and this current proposal, not proposal, but active discussion, so to speak, are two very different topics. And like maybe if two were active at the same time and you answer the first one and the second one, you're like a little bit puzzled because the nature of the question or the nature of the discussion is quite different. And what is decision or what is asking people to chime in, the nature of it is could be very different to the first. And how do we make it easier uh, according the code of conduct of people's responsibility in this place? What are we asking the participants of? But sort of helping everybody to be clear in the maybe it's by having a little bit more structures how that issue is presented. Um, yeah, no, it's a very interesting point. I think anyway you're bringing up because the next active issue that say seems like you guys want to propose something that could be another very different thing, and maybe someone like me who is not in the weeds of it when I look at it because I understood the last one fairly clearly because I was the one going through it. Um, so I kind of know what that's about and what that's asking for, but maybe to others it's not as clear. Therefore, it's harder for people to digest and participate. Maybe, but I might have the same. I might encounter the same situation when it comes to other people's proposal. How I would be interpreting the whole paragraph or text of what is proposing or asking people to do. Is that right, Merrick? Something like that, no? At least one of the point.
yeah, yeah. Um,
I think maybe it's just an ongoing thing that as we encounter some of these things, like Merrick just encountered over the past week, it's an opportunity for us to listen these feedback and improve on how we put it forward, how we bring the issue up. That's my thought.
Hmm. Yeah, I think definitely.
Harold, you are now mute.
Yeah, for us as Wolf Clan to be thinking of yeah, that's definitely something we should be thinking about. Clear and almost actionable. Yeah, yeah, clear proposals and specific text.
Yeah, and it makes sense too, right? Like some of what I think could be confusing is like notes in active issues, right? Notes of um, of some dialogues, right? Which uh, uh, I think makes sense, right? When there's also not so much open-endedness going on, like when there's a more solid proposal that comes with it, it's okay to like take notes on something that maybe happened real time, and so you want to get it into the thread somewhere, but it could be deemed extra due diligence. Um, but there's also like maybe using the those separate channels of men and women clan for coordination and stuff like this before you know an official post into active issues, so that it gives folks to decide on time frames and coordinate real time calls without having to do it in the active issues thread. And so the only thing that really comes up in the active issues thread are more formulated proposals and the responses to those proposals, and maybe notes that go along with other sessions that happened around that same original proposal. But that nuance from Longhouse to Sunday, I think, plays a lot into it. And also the points that you made, Merrick, about being able the a big part of Wolf Clan's responsibilities, or the representative Wolf Clan's responsibilities before broadcasting things publicly, is to align it, or see if it does align at all with Constitution and some of those deeper understandings, which is a huge piece that right now we're probably going to see a lot of, right? Because we don't have representatives. So it's on people who nobody has selected or deemed has these capacities. Um, there's going to be a whole lot of people who don't have those capacities attempting to post in the active issues channel. So it'll be just a collective learning experience, um, likely, right? Until we have representatives to kind of narrow that down to the people who have those firm understandings that can make it as smooth as possible, right? In terms of the flow.
I think you reminded me of like you when you mentioned previously some other sessions, like the preliminary stuff actually is where things take a majority of the time. So actually,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we should do the prelim um, in those public channels first before we actually get it down to a shaped form, and then you put it forward in the active issue so that the active issue doesn't get or still gets so much question thrown about and people get lost in the conversations and not sure
Exactly.
like what is deciding or asking for. So it's almost perhaps in the men's clans or women's clans or in the DMs or in Turtle Wolf and Bear channel, all these available channels and discussion places where all this upfront discussion happen and dialogue happen and consensus happen before you actually put it forward, the wolf or whoever in the active issue. Therefore, when it gets to active issue, it should be fairly simple from then on because all the dialogues has already happened and you
Well,
sorry.
I do want to make clear too, though, that as of right now, that would make sense because there are no representatives, right?
Yeah,
Where that formulation has to happen between multiple people, because there's not the one person who's capable of doing or is opted into doing it, right? But normally, right, that type of formalizing, or I should say formulating a proposal out of issues that come across, is going to be solely a representative, Wolf Clan representative, responsibility, and so it wouldn't like uh, all that extra work that is on kind of distributed amongst us right now, or amongst the Wolf Clans anyway right now. Um, wouldn't be such a big issue, right? That it had to be, quelled with the other channels. And in fact, the first time that we see an issue will be in active issues, and it'll already be formulated because that person has already done the work. Perhaps in those other channels, but it it it, it doesn't have to be like in a concrete official part of the flow, or be a new place for part of the prelims to happen. Because I think a big part of the, if not majority and all of the prelim phase is inactive issues, it's supposed to be anyway. But just without these representatives for now, things are going to be a little, you know, uh, harder to maintain in terms
Yeah.
of ensuring we have formula, really well thought out posts in the active issues. So I just want to clarify that what you're saying makes 100% sense for where we are right now, but we have to be careful not to confuse the different phases and where the tooling comes in like once we actually have representatives, because I think it'll
Yeah.
cut a lot of the, it'll cut a lot of the fat off of what's going on in that channels.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, yeah. Thank you kindly, y'all, for thinking that hard with me on these things. These are the weeds for real, huh? But it's exciting to name some of this stuff, or have uh, to have guardrails, with this native dialogue and such. So thank you as always. But yeah, we should do a closing if it's okay with you guys, unless there's something else that we're forgetting.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, does anybody else want to do it? I did the opening. I can do the closing, of course, but I'm gonna leave the floor open.